I'm sorry, Brian, but I've tried to keep my cool for the entirety of this conversation, but I have to say, the whole thing makes me sick. It makes me sick.
You know, as I've indicated to you in other settings, I've never been more unhappy being an American citizen than I am now, because I just see I see our entire system of laws under major assault in a very, very destructive way.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Magic Skeptic here, aka Magic Dara, and you're all most welcome to another episode of A Magician's Thoughts. And I've got an incredibly special episode for you today. Long-time contributing guest Brian O'Neill is joining me here today on the podcast to discuss a rather controversial topic, which you'll have no doubt seen in the thumbnail. Brian needs no introduction on this channel. If you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you know who he is. But just for any of those new listeners, let me just give him a brief introduction. Brian is a practicing lawyer and an historian to boot. He has published his own books, and his everyday job is that of a legal practitioner. So I can think of no better person to have this conversation with than Brian. Brian, you are enormously welcome to the channel once again. It's great to finally see you again, my friend.
Well, a pleasure here too, although I've always followed you with anticipation every Friday. And, you know, had conversations back and forth about comment section here. So, yeah, we're talking about a tough subject today, and I'll let you get on with it, the intro.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough subject, and I guess I better address the elephant in the room. We do live in a time of identity politics, and I feel it would be remiss of me, my friend, not to address the obvious, that both of us are biological males who identify as such, and I do suspect that there will be those, perhaps in my audience or those who may find the channel through this video, who may be uncomfortable with the idea that two biological males who identify as such are about to discuss the rights of biological females and what they can and cannot do with their bodies. Two things on that, and then you can jump in, my friend, if you have anything to add. The first is, I mean, I'm pro-choice, and I think you are as well, Brian. So we're not about to tell women what they can and cannot do with their bodies. On the note of my deployment of the word women, just so we don't trip over the transgender issue again and again and again, for the purposes of this conversation, anytime I deploy the word woman, dear listener, just remember that I'm referring to a biological female, okay? I know there are people who are women, and I'm fully on board the trans issue, people who identify as women who do not have a womb and who have male genitalia and biology. I just want to address that. When I deploy the word woman in this conversation, I am referring to biological females. So that acknowledged, Brian and I are obviously biological males, and we're going to discuss abortion rights. I think that this is a conversation for everybody. I don't think that conversations should be walled off according to immutable characteristics. I think that's a very, very important point to start with. And if you don't agree with me on that, let me see if I can shift your intuitions. The first thing to say would be something like, I have a fiance who is a biological female. Of course, I've got skin in the game. I care about whether or not she can have an abortion if she wants one. I have a niece in Ireland who's 12. I care about what happens to her in the future if indeed she ever gets accidentally pregnant, or, you know, worse still. And I won't even say what I'm talking about with worse still. I trust and assume you, Brian, and the listeners can infer what I mean there. I think abortion rights are very important, and I think it is the collective responsibility of society to discuss such prescient and important issues, especially, Brian, within the context of what's going on in Texas at the moment. Before we get on to Texas, though, my friend, do you have anything to add to those opening comments?
I think one has to be increasingly open and understanding about gender identity issues. I represent a number of asylum claimants, one from Jamaica who is making the transition from male to female. And that was an interesting discussion. You know, going to go the whole route? I think so. So, um, from my standpoint, I mean, humanity, we're all a connection of genes and genetic predispositions. We're sort of built that way, and sometimes people leave the factory floor with a different configuration than quote normal unquote. So I've always considered homosexuality to be or any other gender variation to be a variety of humanity, and it's natural. That's the way I look at it. So you accept people the way they are, and you accommodate them. It's all really in pursuit of basic human freedoms, the way I look at it.
On the gender identity, or the, shall we say, the identity politics point, Brian, do you agree with my comments on our permission to discuss this topic despite not having a womb?
I think so, because we live in a world of women as well as men, and some of our closest relationships are with women. So really, what we're talking about is their right to decide, and who the hell would I be to deny a woman a choice in an important, in that vital area of existence.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to address it off the bat, because some people might be a little bit queasy about the idea of two biological males discussing abortion rights. I think it's just, important to acknowledge that even biological males have skin in the game. I mean, first of all, the transgender issue, it's weird because some people see themselves as progressive when they say biological men or men cannot speak about these issues because they don't have a womb. But they really shoot themselves in the foot when they make that point, because there are people who identify as male and yet have a womb. So do those people get to talk about abortion issues despite identifying as male, even though they could indeed support life in their body? Does their progressivism extend to that point, or are they not now allowed because they identify as male? Or are they just saying, these progressive types, I say progressive in inverted commas, I might add, because I don't think this is a particularly progressive talking point, but are they just saying that people with penises can't discuss the abortion issue, irrespective of how they identify in terms of gender? And I just think that's really messy. As soon as you start gatekeeping conversations according to immutable characteristics, I think you're going against the teachings of someone like MLK, Martin Luther King, who said that we should judge not people by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I feel like if we wall off conversations, for example, people get uncomfortable about so-called white men discussing race issues and racism. I get really annoyed about that particular topic because, yes, I am a white man, but I'm Irish, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
Is anybody who says to an Irish person that they have no business discussing racism is obviously completely unfamiliar with the 800 years of racism and brutality visited upon the Irish by the British Empire. It was only 50 years ago where it said in England in shop windows, no blacks, no dogs, and no Irish. So I'm very familiar with racism as an Irish person. The idea that racism is only something that happens to persons of color, I think, is a gross reading of history. So look, I just want to make the case that I think it's important that Brian and I discuss abortion as well as everybody else, irrespective of what hangs between our legs and how we identify. And so I just wanted to address that elephant in the room before we go any further, my friend. Do you agree with that?
Yes, and I'm also going to just make one comment, historical, I guess. I'll never forget watching Ian Paisley on the television once, talking about the fundamental difference, almost like physiological difference, between biological Irish Catholics and the Protestant Catholics up in Northern Ireland. And I just looked at him and I could not believe it. He actually considered them a different, lower form of human being. And I'm thinking, so basically, because I don't believe in the Catholic Church, or rather I do believe in the Catholic Church, I'm different from you biologically. Just insane. I
think the the Troubles in the north of Ireland could very well be a fascinating podcast all on their own, but I do appreciate the historical reference there, my friend. So with that acknowledged, and with the elephant of identity politics addressed, I think it's important that we move on to discuss matters in Texas. And just in case you're wondering, dear listener, yes, I am going to dedicate some time later in the podcast to arguments in favor of abortion. Or in other words, arguments in favor of the pro-choice side of this. So if you're curious about why I think a woman should be able to choose whether or not she has an abortion, that will be coming later. But for now, I want to open the floor to you, my esteemed friend, the legal expert in the room. Brian, can you tell us what's going on in Texas at the moment and why we should all be terrified about it?
So what's going on in Texas is particularly invidious for a couple of reasons. The first one is the statute was tailor-made to evade judicial review, and one of the bedrock principles of American constitutional law and Supreme Court adjudication is that when it comes to the federal Constitution and constitutional rights, the Supreme Court has the final word on what the law is. So what Texas has tried to do is to say, okay, we're going to create a private right of action that will allow individuals to enforce an anti-abortion mandate by bringing a civil action against the people whom they are accusing of engaging in the practice, or either as physicians or as the woman having the procedure. So the very idea that would elude review somehow is, I think, fundamentally unconstitutional. And one of the reasons why I think it is because it's a sport on the law in the sense that, wait a minute, the legislature passed the statute that enables this private right of action. Why isn't that itself state action that, particularly where it has this pernicious intent, why isn't that state action that is subject to judicial review by the Supreme Court? Okay? So, if you have carve-outs like this, then you've got huge problems in terms of the very structure of the way that law is interpreted and applied in this country. And it's like giving a green light to what I'd call statutory vigilantism that eludes constitutional review.
So allow me then, Brian, to be the go-between, because I think I understand what you're saying, but I don't want to kind of prejudge my audience. Perhaps the audience is entirely on board and understands everything you've said thus far. But just in case anybody is unclear about what you're referring to there, the broad strokes are that Texas has introduced a law which makes it illegal to have an abortion after 6 weeks. Or at the very least, it makes it illegal to help somebody have an abortion after 6 weeks. So my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, my friend, is that what this law actually does is criminalize the helping of a woman having an abortion. So a doctor would obviously not want to help a woman have an abortion if they're going to lose their medical license and they're going to get fired and they're going to get fined and potentially go to prison and all the rest of it. So that's the first part. But you can even be fined and criminalized for driving that woman to the hospital or for assisting in any way, shape, or form. So like you said, it's kind of like a vigilantism that's been introduced. So they haven't made abortion illegal. They've made helping women have abortions illegal. And the cutoff point is 6 weeks. So some people have rather cheaply suggested, oh no, abortion isn't illegal. You can just have one in the first 6 weeks. The really disgusting truth about that and why it's such a sneaky law is that most women don't even know that they're pregnant 6 weeks in.
Right.
You wouldn't be showing, their menstrual cycle might just be late. There's a lot of women don't know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. So this is a rather kind of clandestine, surreptitious banning of abortion. And again, the route that they've gone down, they've made it not the responsibility of the authorities to arrest and detain women who have abortions. They've made it the responsibility of private citizens. So if you suspect that your neighbor or your sister or some person in your society has had an abortion or is on their way to having an abortion or something like that, you can report it as a private citizen and you get paid. There is a bounty involved in this law, and my understanding is that it's a $10,000 bounty. If indeed the report that you make turns out to be accurate, the state will pay you $10,000 for reporting said crime. So it's kind of like you said, it's a vigilantism, it's a surreptitious circumventing of the existing abortion law. So they haven't actually made abortion illegal, they've made helping a woman have an abortion illegal. Is that correct, loosely?
Yes, it is essentially. Let me quote Justice Sotomayor's dissent in a decision that temporarily upheld the statute. We'll talk about that in a minute too. And she says, quote, "The act authorizes any private citizen to file a lawsuit against any person who provides an abortion in violation of the act, aids or abets such an abortion, including by paying for it, regardless of whether they know that the abortion is prohibited under the act, and even extends to engage in such conduct."
Jesus Christ.
Courts are required to enjoin the defendant from engaging in these actions in the future and to award the private citizen plaintiff at least $10,000 in statutory damages for each forbidden abortion performed or aided by the defendant.
Oh my God. When you read that out loud. So translation, any citizen who notices that someone has either helped, aided, or abetted in an abortion, any citizen who notices another citizen doing this and reports it and is found to be reporting said occurrence accurately will be awarded $10,000, a bounty.
Yeah.
Jeez, it's just...
I mean, and let's just say that abortion is legal in New York, which it is, and that someone drives the pregnant woman to the airport to fly to New York to have the procedure done there where it's perfectly legal. I can see this being stretched so far that
you're correct.
Like that would happen.
No, you are correct. I've read a lot in preparation for this conversation, my friend, and I read exactly that. So if somebody in the state of Texas drives their loved one to the airport so that they can leave Texas to get an abortion in a state where it's legal, and then they return to Texas after having had said abortion, if somebody notices that a person drove this woman to the airport, they can still be criminalized because they helped a woman have an abortion even outside of the boundaries of Texas. This is absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's just crazy.
This is absolutely nuts. So I've got a little bit of a timeline here. So when this abortion statute was tabled and was passed, it was more or less immediately blocked by one Robert L. Pittman, who was a U.S. district judge. He blocked it. He said, no, sorry, you can't circumvent the Constitution. You can't do this. You can't make abortion into a vigilante system where citizens report each other and get a $10,000 bounty for doing so. So he put a block on it. It puts the onus on private citizens to save those, or to rather not save, but to sue those who help or have abortions. And that's why Robert L. Pittman put a block on it. But the Supreme Court, weeks later, I don't remember the exact amount of time, you'll have to forgive me, but basically the next step in the chronology is that the Supreme Court ruled that the new law actually stands, but that those who wish to challenge it can do so. And so that's where we're at. The last I checked, the law still stands, and there are people in Texas, women's rights bodies and so forth, who are now in the process of challenging this statute, which stands according to the latest ruling of the Supreme Court. And so I've got one last quote for you here, my friend, because again, I said I did my homework here. One last quote, and this comes from a Supreme Court, in the Supreme Court oral arguments. This is the U.S. Solicitor General. Mm-hmm. And she said the following. Her name is Elizabeth Prelogar. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing this U.S. Solicitor General's name, but she said the following. If they can do that, then no constitutional right is safe. And that's essentially what you were saying, my friend. No constitutional decision from this court is safe. That would be an intolerable state of affairs, and it cannot be the law. Our constitutional guarantees cannot be that fragile, and the supremacy of federal law cannot be that easily subject to manipulation. In other words, and if I've understood the U.S. Solicitor General's comments here, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, again, Brian, as the legal expert in this conversation. If I've understood those comments correctly, what she's saying is, if any constitutional right can be eroded or circumvented by simply introducing a sort of civil workaround where citizens can sue each other, well, then every single right that's guaranteed in the US can be circumvented. I read a fascinating article, my friend, about gun rights right now.
Yes.
Gun law is a very interesting conversation, which perhaps we can discuss another time, but just to make a point by analogy here, citizens, constitutionally speaking, are guaranteed the right to bear arms. What if I table legislation that doesn't take away your right to bear arms, just like this new law in Texas doesn't take away your right to have an abortion? But what if I took away a citizen's ability to help you buy a gun? So that means the selling of guns would be illegal. That means if I buy you it for your birthday, that would be illegal. If I give you money to go buy a gun, that would be illegal. So I'm not making it illegal for you to own a gun. I'm just making it illegal for anybody to help you procure one, including those who sell them. I think the right wing in your country, my friend, would lose their minds if such a law were introduced, which circumvented gun rights and your ability to bear arms. But yet, the right wing in your country is applauding this unconstitutional, abhorrent move, despite the fact that it's principally analogous to the gun situation I just described. Have I missed something here, my friend?
No, you haven't. I mean, the governor of California actually has a draft statute along those lines, and yeah, it just made the right-wing heads explode, you know. So I don't know that he's actually introduced it into the legislature yet, but I mean, it's there basically saying if you can do this to abortion rights in Texas, then why shouldn't we be able to do this to gun rights in California? Because I mean, it has as much to do with the preservation of life as the abortion bounty statute does too. And we're talking about preventing violent death. So it's actually just unbelievable what's going on. Sorry, my friend, finish your thought. I guess two things. The first one is one of the problems of being an attorney for 43 years is you lose your terminological references, and you start spouting stuff that sounds like Sanskrit. That's okay. That's why I'm happy to be the go-between. Again, I don't want to assume that my audience isn't going to understand you. They might very well, my audience might very well have understood more of what you said than I have, in fact. But just in case, I just want that to be clear. I don't want the audience to think that I'm talking down to them or patronizing. Just in case there is a member of the audience who is failing to grasp what you're saying. And if indeed I ever fail to grasp what you're saying, my friend, I will ask for clarification, or in the event that I do understand, but that I'm worried that maybe some members of the audience won't have grasped it, I will serve as a go-between. So please be as verbose and articulate as you desire. I would rather you use the actual terminology so that we get a real sense of what's actually going on here. But for now, I think the gun analogy is a really, really good one. And again, the right wing, how inconsistent and hypocritical would it be for the right wing to applaud this abortion law on one hand, despite the fact that it circumvents abortion rights in a kind of civil manner by making citizens culpable for enforcing the law and making it such that they can sue one another for having abortions, or rather for helping someone have an abortion. How disingenuous and hypocritical would it be to applaud that on one hand and then on the other hand resist such a move in the gun rights? So there is an argument that there is a difference between the two, and I think it'd be useful to get into that right now. Can I just say one thing before you go there? One thing before you go there.
I had a conversation with a friend recently about this exact situation, and I've read online, and a lot of people seem to be chiming in with this. Some people are arguing that this is what makes the United States beautiful. It's the state system. Texas has decided for itself that abortion is illegal, and if you don't like that, you can leave Texas and go somewhere else. I think that's a somewhat disingenuous framing of the situation, because that's only true if you permanently leave Texas. Because as you quite rightly pointed out, my friend, this law also illegalizes one's ability to leave Texas to have an abortion and then return to Texas. So in theory, now I don't know what the statute of limitations is on this. I haven't looked into that. But in theory, if a woman leaves Texas and has an abortion in New York and then comes back a year later to live in Texas again, pending what the statute of limitations is, perhaps you can shed some light on that, my friend. I'm not sure. Maybe there is no statute of limitations.
I'm not sure about that either.
But let's assume there is a statute of limitations of a couple of years or something. That still means that a woman could leave Texas, have an abortion, and come back in 6 months' time, or come back the following week, or come back a year later, and still be criminalized for this. So this idea that this is all just part of the United States and it's wonderful, this plurality of states that have different views on things. If you want to smoke weed, go to California. If you don't agree with that, go somewhere where it's illegal. Yeah, but this law makes it illegal for you to do it in other states as well, assuming you return where they can apprehend you and criminalize you for helping a woman to do this. And so, with the greatest of respect to that talking point, I don't think it applies in the fullest sense. And so I think that's worthy of mentioning here.
Yeah. There are limits to the extent to which state law can go across state borders, but all we're doing here is inviting further litigation on subjects that will imperil federal rights to begin with, or state rights.
Yes.
Because I think any state has the ability to legalize abortion as well. I mean, most of the police powers that deal with this come from the criminal statutes against it. So if those are restricted, if those are repealed, then there you go, or nullified to judicial decision. Let me go back a little bit though, just to talk about the difference between a so-called Second Amendment right and what we're talking about here. I mean, I have the dubious perspective of having been a law student when Roe v. Wade came down in 1972, and there was a big set of discussions about that. Let me mute this in case I have any other calls.
No worries. Just while you're muting that, I am actually fascinated by the Roe v. Wade situation, and so I would hope in your explanation here, my friend, could you explain to myself and the audience what it is that Roe v. Wade actually put in place? What was the finding of Roe v. Wade, and how does this new law in Texas interface with that? If you could give some clarity there, because people talk about Roe v. Wade a lot, and I have a very loose understanding of it, that Roe v. Wade was just a landmark case which essentially made it such that abortion is a constitutional right. So if you could expound on that and just clarify for myself and the audience how exactly Roe v. Wade features in this conversation, that would be fantastic.
Sure. So we have to actually start with the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution, which applies only to the Congress. Okay, or the federal government.
What was the Fifth Amendment?
Fifth Amendment. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, property without due process of law. Then there's nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Okay, so the deprivation of life, liberty, or property without due process of law is the key legal term here, right?
So how does this apply to abortion rights?
So after our Civil War, the 14th Amendment was put into place, and the 14th Amendment said that no state shall do the same thing. So no state shall deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law.
So basically a further enshrining of the Fifth in a stately package. Just so it's clear for the audience, obviously states are separate and they have their own autonomy to a certain extent, but then there's also the overall federal system which can introduce laws that everybody must follow. So what you're saying, my friend, is that at one point the Fifth Amendment was federal, but perhaps certain states might have had ability to resist it. But the next amendment, what number was it?
It was the 14th Amendment.
The 14th Amendment enshrined it within state law as well. Correct?
Yeah, and the whole idea here was that, with the abolition of slavery as a result of the Civil War, no state could go against that and enslave people again. So
yes, states can have autonomy, but not the autonomy to enslave people. Yes, of course.
Right. So there were many private constitutional constitutional rights that were brought underneath the federal Constitution by the action of the Basic Bill of Rights being applied to the states through the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Okay, so why is Roe v. Wade controversial, aside from the fact that it, wholesale nullified the state criminalization of abortion? We get to the whole question of due process of law, and there is a criticism of Roe v. Wade that I can make, which I will discuss here. But let's talk about due process of law and what that actually means. Okay, there are two kinds of due process. The first one is procedural due process. In other words, you can't be deprived of your life, say if you murder somebody, without due process of law. So if you're indicted for the state crime of murder and you're put on trial, they can't just take you out of the jail and hang you. They've got to subject you to a legal procedure that complies with the basic notions of due process: procedural notice, a right to defend, right to counsel, all those things. All right. Procedural due process is essentially the safest procedure. It's the safest constitutional right that you can get under our jurisprudence. All right. Where the court has historically been subjected to criticism is in making going from procedural due process, which is, sure, these things can be taken from you or you can be punished, etc., so long as the proper procedural rights are honored and respected. But then sometimes the court says, and I also think that, or the justices say, we also think that this particular behavior that you're seeking to verify, that you're seeking to enforce, should be protected under the 14th Amendment, and that's called substantive due process. So the differences between something that's created by the literal language of the Constitution and something that the court, in its wisdom, in quotes, decides is a constitutional right. All right. So if you go to the Second Amendment and you look at the literal language about, a well-ordered militia, the right of the citizens to bear arms shall not be infringed, you have it in black and white.
Yes.
There is no explicit right to an abortion in the federal Constitution. Okay?
Sure. This is a criticism that Ben Shapiro, who is a pro-life advocate, and I know you're not a big fan of his, nor am I, but this is one of the criticisms that he often levels at the pro-choice movement in the United States. He says that there is no black and white law. He says, point to me in the law where it says that a woman can have an abortion. So I was hoping you would address that. How do the statutes and the amendments that you have referred to, how were they interpreted in Roe v. Wade such that we got to the right of a woman to choose? How did we get there when in fact there is no black and white guarantee of abortion rights in the Constitution or elsewhere?
It's called a penumbra. I guess, like the if you look at an eclipse, there's the surround, there's something emanating from the body of the planet, or so you see this haze, this surrounding appearance from. I don't know if that makes sense, but if you have a right, let's say the right is a planet, okay, and then then you have the eclipse which goes across it, and you see that there's like if there's a solar eclipse, you see things around the body of the sun itself, the gases that come out and all that. I mean, it's a very poor analogy in a way, but
maybe a better analogy is, I exist, but I also cast a shadow.
Exactly.
My shadow does not have its own ontological status or being. It exists by extension of my existence, if that makes sense. And what you're saying is abortion rights, while not having any ontological status within the Constitution themselves, while not written there in black and white, the shadow that is abortion rights is cast by the Constitution itself and how it's worded. Is that the point you're making?
Yeah, that's a much better analogy than my solar eclipse one, in the sense that
happy to help.
In the sense that I can play a words. It's a reflection of your humanity. It's something that's indistinguishable from your being the person. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property. Well,
I see. So the liberty part there is the bit that's casting the shadow. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. It's a liberty interest.
So in other words, a woman should have the freedom to decide what happens with her body.
Right.
And of course, the Ben Shapiro's of the world will respond and say, what about the freedom of the fetus? What about the life and liberty of the fetus? And so I think we're getting close to the point in the conversation where we're going to have to address that elephant in the room. But before we get there, my friend, I just wanted to give you some time to finish your thoughts on this particular point.
Yeah, sure. An earlier case called Griswold versus Connecticut. And as I recall the case, certainly I studied it in law school, that sought to prohibit the distribution of contraceptives. So the Supreme Court said, no, come on, who are you? No, this is a right that people have to regulate their conception rights. The sole way of the rhythm method is not the sole way of regulating whether or not a woman conceives a child. So,
and in fact, it's a pretty poor way to regulate it.
Right. So
lots of people owe their existence to the rhythm method.
That's true. And there is the phrase called Irish twins as well,
The Catholics are at it again.
Yeah.
I'm quoting Billy Connolly there.
So basically what we have is a situation in which, this part of being a person, this is a reflection or something that emanates from it. I got to take care of this again. And that was in Griswold in Connecticut. The right to receive contraceptives or to purchase them was considered a right of autonomy. It's a decision-making right that you have as a matter of constitutional law.
Yes.
And
another shadow cast.
Exactly.
Because there's you have the right to buy contraceptives or use contraceptives written anywhere in the Constitution or on any law book anywhere, right? This is why I find, just beginning to critique the Shapiro position here, this is why I find his argument so weak here. Point to me the law where, you can have an abortion. Well, I would say to Ben Shapiro, point to me the law where you can use contraceptives. I mean, it's a very silly argument, really. It's quite a facile, childish response, if you'll forgive me for saying so. And perhaps there's some fans of Ben Shapiro watching and I'm going to irritate them by saying this, but I really do think it's a rather pathetic and pedantic argument. Point to me where it says in black and white. Well, so much of what we can and cannot do is not written in black and white. It is in that, it's in that ballpark of the shadow being cast by statutes that have been interpreted by our judicial system, right? I mean, it's a rather facile argument in my view.
Yeah, it's the interpretation of statutes against the federal constitutional rights that the court thinks exist and has, established by judicial precedent. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the real risks here, there's two risks here. The first one is, and this came up when I was a law student, the Supreme Court frequently has been called the least dangerous branch in the United States. We'll get into whether that's still the case or not.
Yeah, probably not anymore, my friend. But yeah, we'll table that for later.
The court can't enforce its own laws. I mean, I think it was Andrew Jackson once who famously said, "Yeah, the court has issued this decision. Now let's see them enforce it." But the court is on very solid ground when it issues a procedural due process decision. When it, quote, strays, unquote, from that and goes over into substantive due process, it runs the risk of finding rights that are constitutional significance that aren't as concrete, and therefore that open the court to criticism.
Yes, because it's interpretational. So just to be clear, when you talk about substantive rulings, you're talking about the shadows, right?
Yes.
You're talking about things that have been ruled on that are interpreted to be an extension of rather an existing legal statute or law on the books, right?
Right. And I mean,
so clearly, yes, abortion rights falling within that realm does open it up to more criticism than if abortion rights were just written there in black and white. That would be more sacrosanct, if you will.
Right. So the question here is,
have they overstepped?
Have they overstepped?
Is the interpretation of the laws as they stand, is it really conducive of a woman's right to choose and to have an abortion?
Yeah, and I mean, even when the decision came down originally, that was, I mean, I remember one of my law professors who, didn't have any ideological axe to grind, basically saying this could be real trouble for the court down the road because it is a significant extension of constitutional, quote, personal autonomy, unquote, rights under our federal system. And there could be a lot of blowback from it. And ever since that decision was announced, there has been a raging controversy about it. I felt at the time that, whether we like it or not, and maybe as a matter of jurisprudence, the prof has got it right in terms of, the problems that this could create. Still, it's a federal constitutional right now, and there really should be no going back. And yet here we are, half a century with the federal constitutional right possessed by half of our population, and we're on the cusp of losing that because certain people want to reverse this and say that it wasn't appropriate. The problem there is, where do you stop rolling rights back?
Yeah.
I mean, does that mean by that rationality that the Supreme Court should never have had any right to make a substantive due process decision? Does that mean that magically all of a sudden contraceptives can be banned? There carries with it here a really substantial risk that we'll lose valuable personal rights that we've had, and that's a real problem. Another real problem that I really think I should mention, because it goes to the heart of what one of the legal controversies here is the case came up before the Supreme Court in the context of a preliminary injunction, and the plaintiff. What is a preliminary injunction, my friend? Yeah, a preliminary injunction means a temporary legal bar on enforcing the statute until the issue is decided. And then it was decided. That was the injunction that was put in by Robert L. Pittman. Is that what you're referring to? Exactly.
And then that injunction was then removed, and the Supreme Court ruled on it and said, no, the statute stands on pending further challenges. The statute stands. That's what you're referring to. Right?
Yes, and the outrageous part about that is that it was done on the so-called shadow docket, which is that they didn't give any real reasons for it. They just said no.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Yes, that's right.
Oh, wow. So the Supreme Court didn't even have to detail their reasoning then?
No, they didn't. They just, this is what we think. We're reversing the injunction pending the outcome of the case. And so that's just the heart and soul of arbitrariness as far as I'm concerned. And it's genuinely signaling that even though they themselves say that abortion rights remain the law of the land, they're not going to validate them while the case is still pending. So you can imagine.
It reminds me of. Sorry to cut across, my friend. It reminds me of a bad teacher who says, you can't do X, and then the student says Y, and the teacher says, because I said so.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And so,
that's such bullshit.
This is also extremely concerning because it tears at the very function of the rule of law itself. I mean, one of the curbs on the court is supposed to be that it gives reasons for its decisions that stand the test of rational scrutiny.
How dare we? How dare we expect justification?
Exactly.
for rulings.
So that's just a huge problem. It's just a huge problem. And I mean, Sotomayor, in her, I think her dissent to the temporary injunction reversal is worth. I can give you a link to that. Is worth putting in your notes so that
Sure.
that can be read.
Yeah, I will pop that in the description below for any of you at home who are interested.
It just blows my mind that they did it, and it's outrageous. And they are showing an increasing tendency to do this. I'll give you another example that I consider horrifying. Every 10 years, we have a national census, and the population is counted, and the counting of the population and population shifts result in this circus called redistricting for congressional seats. And that's inherently political. Have you ever heard, your audience maybe has not heard the term gerrymandering, but essentially
I'm very familiar with gerrymandering as a person who is familiar with the history of the north of Ireland, where the Protestant minorities in Catholic areas gerrymandered the local councils such that they could remain in power despite the fact that they were in a minority position. So that might give the audience some sense of what gerrymandering is, but please proceed with an explanation from your perspective, my friend.
Yeah, it's an artificial structuring of the district so that a majority for one party will be enshrined.
A false majority.
Yes, exactly.
A false majority, yes.
You could have when it was first done in the 19th century, it looked like some sort of serpent. So it looked like a salamander. It was just a reptilian kind of structure that went all over the place. And they called it, and I think Jerry was the guy that came up with it. So they called it a gerrymander. And so you can have these like snake-like, ridiculously
You're just redrawing the lines. You're essentially just redrawing the lines on the map to create artificial majorities. Right, if the people at home just want a visual representation, if we draw the lines here and here, and it gives party X a minority, but then we just actually redraw this line to be closer to here, and it gives party X a majority, it's now a false majority because this is where the line really was, but you've redrawn the line to create a fake majority. That is just, visually speaking, a rough explanation of what gerrymandering is. So yeah, it's corruption beyond belief. It is not something that should ever be tolerated. But of course, people who want to be in power will stop at nothing sometimes in order to get it.
So in Georgia, a federal court came to the conclusion that there should be 2 black districts, and I think the map was actually, they said you need 2 districts here because there have been significant demographic changes in the percentage of black people in the state.
Oh, I can see where this is going.
is such that Georgia, maybe let's say it has 8 districts or whatever. Well, these 2 are. It makes sense for these 2 on a proportional representation basis to be ones separated, where there are predominantly black populations. Okay?
Yeah.
And the Circuit Court of Appeals, to whom this was made, said, "Yeah, you're right. All 3 judges that considered, the judicially sanctioned construction and recognition of these districts, all three federal circuit court judges said, you're right. It went to the Supreme Court, and just like that, without any explanation at all, they turned it around, said no. And they also said, but not to worry, because this will come up to us, and it will come up to us in such a way that we'll be able to determine whether or not it's correct or not. The problem with that is that it's not going to come up to the Supreme Court before the midterms are decided in 2022. So basically what they did was give the right wing in Georgia a district.
Yeah.
And they did it without a word of explanation. And why, you have to ask yourself, why would they do this other than for political reasons?
Of course. So by redrawing the lines there, they essentially created an artificial right-wing majority in a district, correct? Yeah. Well, you only get one black district. Now, I mean, there are other problems that I have with, their approach. What they say political gerrymandering is okay. That's also madness. I couldn't agree more. But could you draw the connective tissue or draw the connective line here, my friend? How does this relate to the abortion question? Are you worried that such gerrymandering is going to occur in order to create pro-abortion districts? Is that what you're? Yeah. Well, or rather, anti-abortion districts.
There's two evils here. The first one is the subversion. The first one is the substantive 14th Amendment right to an abortion or not. And then the frustration of that right by the shadow docket, where a majority simply says, no, we're reversing it. We don't have to give any reasons. Here again, this is another constitutional right to vote. And once again, they frustrated what the lower court said by entering an order that has no rationale for it.
Yeah.
And, their argument that there's no harm created due to this, because eventually we'll hear it, is absurd on its face, because there's going to be a national election involving this very district this November. So they're basically frustrating the democratic process in this country because they don't like the way the voters may vote. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah. So I think it might be time then, my friend, to jump into the actual arguments themselves. So I think we've laid a really firm foundation for the following discussion, which is, if indeed, and it does say in the Constitution that citizens should have their life, liberty, and property protected, and the Roe v. Wade ruling was a shadow ruling, in a sense, a substantive ruling, in that the liberty that said law speaks of also extends to a woman's right to choose, that she may have freedom over what happens with her body. I think it's only right, and it would be remiss of us to fail to address this. And so if you'll permit me, I'll dive right in, and then I can get your thoughts on this. My first question to anybody who thinks that such liberty doesn't extend to abortion rights, my first question is this, and it's a very simple one. Do you believe in equality? Do you think that people should be equal? Now, I don't mean equality of outcome. I just mean equality of opportunity. Should we all, as human beings who share this planet together, be equal in terms of opportunity? I'm not articulating a communist utopia or something. Just equal in terms of opportunity. And thus far, I've never once heard someone say no to that. They sometimes throw their eyebrow up and they're wondering, oh goodness, what's he trying to get me to agree to here? But it's not a gotcha. It's, do you agree and do you believe in equality? And if you don't, I don't imagine there would be any point in continuing the conversation, right. Because such an individual has already demonstrated themselves, to be rather immoral in my view. But the question is simple. Do you believe in equality? And if they say yes, my follow-up question is, again, equally simple. Well, then why are you trying to give special rights to the unborn? Because the fact is, and this might be another substantive point here, Brian, but no human being has the right to use another human being's body without their permission. Now, that isn't written anywhere in law, but if we have life, liberty, by extension, I think it's pretty damn obvious by extension, the shadow cast by the word liberty includes the idea that nobody can hurt or harm me or use my body without my permission.
Right.
And so, no, a fetus doesn't get to use a woman's body unless she is happy for it to be there. Now, this addresses the Ben Shapiro point, which is, what about the liberty and the life of the fetus in the womb? I fully agree that that fetus in the womb has an equal right to life as the mother. But the problem is that the fetus is using the mother's body, in the case of a woman who wants to have an abortion, it's using the mother's body without her permission. Now, some people would say, oh, but she got pregnant. Yeah, but she might have gotten pregnant accidentally. So that is definitionally something that doesn't include permission, right? She might have been raped. That's definitionally not a woman giving their permission to be pregnant. She might have used contraceptives that failed. Again, that is not an act of one giving their permission. If that's permission, then that's permission in the same way as my window breaks in my house during a hurricane, and so therefore I welcomed the wind and the rain into my house. No, I didn't. The wind and rain got into my house because the window broke. To say that that was an act of permission is to disabuse the word of its, I think, rather intuitive and obvious meaning. So the fetus is in the mother's womb without her permission, and so she has the right to terminate that pregnancy. It's very, very simple to me. People want to get into discussions, my friend, about when does life begin. I'm happy to grant the Catholic view that life begins from the very moment of conception. I don't agree with that. But for the sake of the discussion, I'm happy to grant personhood from the moment of conception. I don't care when life begins. It's not pertinent for my argument. My argument is simple. People don't have the right to use other people's bodies without their permission. And if a fetus is in a mother's womb and the mother does not want it to be there, then it is her right to have an abortion. Now, clearly there comes a point in the development of the fetus where an abortion is no longer the pathway to go down. You can have a cesarean section and have the child removed that way, right? I don't agree with late term abortions. You know, having an abortion in month 8 seems improper to me, but that's not me being pro-life. I'm just pointing out there that clearly it's obvious that one can have a section and have the child removed in a manner that doesn't end its life. So I'm pro-abortion all the way up to the point where viability begins, and then I'm still pro-choice at that point. I'm pro-choice all the way along. It's just that at the point of viability, an abortion is no longer necessary. You can just have a cesarean section. It's not complicated, I don't think. So just to be clear to the listener, and then you can ask me your questions about my position, my friend. I am pro-choice. A woman should be able to have a choice over what happens with her body and whether or not her body is used by another individual. I'll just give the analogy quickly. It's the classic kind of, violinist analogy. If let's say I have a friend, let's make it a child to make it simple. If I have a 5-year-old who's going to die, but the doctors invent an amazing new procedure by which that 5-year-old can be attached to my body with a series of tubes and machines, so that my lungs will do the child's breathing, my stomach will do their digestion, my liver will clean their blood, etc., right? Or my kidneys will do that, or whatever. If that could be done such that the 5-year-old is attached to my body, and then I go ahead, I say, okay, yeah, attach my 5-year-old to my body, with the full knowledge that if I ever detach myself, my 5-year-old will die. Would it be permissible for me a year into this scenario where my 5-year-old is living off my body, I just decide, you know what, I can't live with this anymore? Is it permissible for me to detach the 5-year-old from my body? I think yes. I think you have the right to say whether or not another human continues to live off of your body. And yes, it's unfortunate that in this hypothetical, the 5-year-old dies when we detach them. And while you might say that I'm a moral monster as a parent for doing that, because I don't care about morality here in this conversation, I just care about what rights we have. I think women can have abortions for bad reasons, immoral reasons. I also think they can have them for moral reasons, but that's beside the point. We have rights. I have a right to, for example, vote, and I might vote for an immoral policy, but that doesn't mean that the right to vote should be suspended, Rights have to be guaranteed regardless of how we use them morally. And so again, should I be able to detach that 5-year-old from my body, which would result in their death? I say yes, because you should have permission over who uses your body and who doesn't. You should be able to exit that scenario. And before anybody pokes holes in the analogy, oh, but that's not the same as pregnancy. Yes, nothing is analogous perfectly to pregnancy, because pregnancy is unique. But there are analogies to be drawn here. First of all, this is my child. Second of all, they're going to die if I detach them from my body. There's two key analogies there. But you might say, oh, but you didn't put them in that position of dependency. Well, I can augment the analogy and say, let's imagine my irresponsible parenting has put the child in that position where they're going to potentially die. Should I then be compelled to attach them to my body? Or do I have the option to detach them if I so desire? Again, I still say yes. I'll just finish on this, my friend, and you can respond, because I've said quite a bit. It comes down to a very simple question. Do we have equal rights? If you think yes, and I agree, nobody else on the planet has the right to use anybody else's body without their permission. Nobody has that right. So why, if you agree with equal rights, would you be granting special rights? The right for a fetus to use another person's body with impunity, without their permission. Why would you grant that special right if you believe in equal rights? That is my argument, my friend. It does not require that we identify where life begins. It doesn't require that at all. It's simply the case that if you believe in equal rights, then you clearly can't grant this special right to a fetus. It's that simple. What do you think?
I think I'm going to run away from that one, because it's kind of hard to it's hard to justify. But I'll run away from it by saying.
So you don't agree, then, my friend?
I don't think I have to agree, given the state of science at the present time, one way or the other. I think it's a distinct moral question there. But what I'll say is that, the thing we shouldn't forget about Roe v. Wade is that it dealt with that issue. And it dealt with that issue by the trimester analysis that it had. And basically it said during the first trimester, the woman has a unregulated right to terminate the pregnancy, and it came to the conclusion that viability didn't really exist past, until the first trimester was reached. During the second trimester, it said that the state had a reasonable right to safeguard the potential humanity or the viability of the fetus by regulations, but in certain circumstances, such as where continuation of the pregnancy would endanger the life of the mother, or, in the case of rape, or something that was fundamentally non-consensual on the woman's part, then it could introduce reasonable regulation. And then in the third trimester, it basically said no. So there was a significant limit on the right to abortion in the whole statute to begin with. And the battle that's been fought for the last half century since then has really been the question of, does life begin at conception or not? And, what rights does the state have to intrude upon the first trimester decision that the mother would have?
If I could interject there, my friend, because that is really, this is why I don't agree with that. When people want to make it a conversation about when life begins, that is, I dare say, almost an unanswerable question. It's like the question, when do grains of sand become a pile? Right? Because, it's like, when does one become an adult? Now, you can arbitrarily say, oh, you become an adult when you're 18. So really, are you telling me 6 seconds before midnight on your 18th birthday, are you telling me that you are not, ontologically speaking, an adult, and that something magical happens to your body as soon as you cross midnight and become 18? That it doesn't stand up to scrutiny when you try to identify a single point in time when something becomes the case. So trying to identify when life begins, in my view, is a fool's errand. I'm happy to grant personhood and the fact that it's a life from the moment of conception for the sake of the argument, because it doesn't change my position at all. We suspend the right to life of people all the time when they infringe upon the rights of others. For example, if a terrorist was about to push a button that was going to detonate a bomb that was going to kill another individual. We would, as a collective society, I imagine, have no problem if the only person who could stop them in that moment was a sniper who had aim on the terrorist head. We would grant the suspension of that terrorist's right to life in that moment, precisely because they're about to violate another person's rights. I view the abortion argument in exactly the same way. The fetus, unintentionally, I'm not arguing that the fetus is some kind of Machiavellian evil entity. The fetus, through no fault of its own, and this can happen, maybe the terrorist through no fault of their own, maybe they've been brainwashed, maybe the terrorist has a severe mental deficiency and has been coerced into committing this action. There's all sorts of reasons why the terrorist might be involuntarily doing what they're doing as well, and yet it would still be necessary to shoot them in that moment, despite the fact that they might be an unconscious and unwilling participant, and our sympathies might reside with the terrorist in that instance. But the child, the fetus, I'm happy to grant it personhood, is an unintentional victimizer of the woman. They are using the woman's body. In the case of a woman who wants to have an abortion, they're using the woman's body without her permission. That is not a right that any human being has. You're not allowed to use other people's bodies without their permission. And if you violate another person's rights intentionally or unintentionally, we can take steps towards it. In the case of a pregnant woman, the steps we take are in the direction of abortion, unless it's viability, in which case the fetus can be removed or the baby can be removed, and there's procedures that can happen there. But if we're talking about, the first trimester, just to focus there, where there is no viability, as you alluded to, my friend, again, that fetus is using that woman's body without her permission. And so its right to life, which I'm happy to grant it, but it gets suspended because it's violating a right unintentionally. Again, it didn't ask to be there, but it's violating the woman's right to choose what happens with her body. Nobody gets to force you to do with your body that which you do not want to do. People's rights can be suspended if they're violating other people's rights. But again, the pro-life people want to say we're violating the fetus's right to life here. I don't agree with this. I think the right to life of the fetus is suspended because it is violating the woman's right to choose what happens with her body, right? No one gets to decide what happens to somebody else's body without their permission, unless, of course, we're talking about a criminal who we need to lock up, so we take away their right to freedom of movement because it's practical and necessary to do so. The fetus is in the woman's body, and if the woman doesn't want the fetus to be there, then that woman has the right to say what happens to her body. Now, look, that is my view, my friend. I think it's pretty clear. I'll just sketch out one more analogy to make the point, and then the listeners can be the deciders at the end whether or not I've made a solid case, whether or not they think I'm a moron, whether or not they think I'm an immoral lunatic. The other analogy is this: if your child gets sick and is going to die unless you donate a kidney, must you be compelled?
I think the answer there is no.
Of course it's no, because if we set the law up such that parents were compelled to donate their kidneys despite not wanting to, we would have created a law that compels people without their permission to have their bodies harvested, have their bodies used to prolong the life of another or to enable the life of another. This is, principally speaking, analogous to abortion. A woman's body is not an incubator. And if anybody views a woman's body as an incubator, then you are immoral. You do not view women as individuals with wants, needs, desires, feelings, right? With their own sovereignty. You cannot hold a parent down in this analogy against their will, sedate them, remove their kidney, and give it to their child because their child is going to die without it. That would be crazy. But that is, in a manner of speaking, and by way of analogy, what is happening to women in Texas right now if they are unlucky enough not to realize they're pregnant in the first 6 weeks. They're not allowed to have an abortion, which is to say that their body, without their permission, is forced into a situation where it provides life and sustenance to another entity without their permission. That is exactly what happens in the kidney analogy. A parent, without giving their own consent or permission, their body, without, again, consent, is being used to sustain the life of another. This, to my mind, is intolerable. It is despicable. It is medieval. And it should not be tolerated or permitted. And so that is why, dear listener, and Brian, my friend, that is why I am pro-choice.
I mean, I don't think that I have to agree with you on that one. I'd have to really give it some thought. I can tell you clearly that Roe v. Wade was the subject of a lot of criticism because of how murky and messy the trimester analysis was that was utilized in order to validate the right. There's no question that it's a conditional constitutional right of autonomy that's granted at the present time, and in a sense, it's a fairly conservative decision from that perspective. Again,
Sorry, go ahead.
So, I mean, the way I look at it is it was a rough decision to make in favor of personal autonomy. There were compromises that were built into it, and it's been fought over vociferously ever since. But I can't. There's no set of circumstances I can see where your vision of personal autonomy and an absolute right to an abortion is going to fly in the United States. That's just not going to work given the circumstances that we're presented with. I'm not saying that you're wrong about it, but looking at this from a practical standpoint, we're in an enormous fight right now to try to preserve the right to an abortion that we presently have, and I think we're probably going to wind up losing it. But
yeah, and that's a grave concern of mine. I'm curious about two things though. Why are you pro-choice? Because when you keep appealing to, look, I'm pro-choice because that's what the law says and so on. Surely you would acknowledge, and perhaps I've misunderstood you, but surely you would acknowledge that there is a distinction to be made between the law and what is moral. You know, it used to be the law that you could own a person in your nation, right? So I'm just curious, why are you pro-choice? If you don't agree with my argumentation, if you don't agree with the analogy, say, where no parent should be forced to offer a kidney to save their child, and by the same token, no woman should be forced to offer her womb to save a child or to offer sustenance and life to a child. If you don't agree with my arguments as I've laid them out, or if you find them, suspect in one way or another, I'm not asking you to poke holes in my arguments. I'm just curious in your independent reasoning. Why are you in favor of a woman's right to choose, my friend?
I'm going to go to the very beginning of our discussion about the protestations about whether or not males have the ability or the standing, if you will, to weigh in on this. And, I've had family members that have had this difficult choice to make, precisely because I'm a male and precisely because it's a woman's right to choose. I defer and I'll allow the woman to make the choice because it's not my body.
Okay, but so translated then, your argument in favor of abortion is kind of an assertive one. You're saying it's a woman's body, and so you're making a bodily autonomy argument. You're saying it's her body, she should be able to make a choice about what happens to it. That's your argument for abortion, right?
Exactly. And the other thing I'd say about it is, I've seen and kind of experienced firsthand the negative consequences that has for a woman that makes the decision to terminate a pregnancy. So there's an enormous moral decision that goes along with that difficult choice, and many times it has consequences for the mother or the expectant mother that they don't anticipate at the time.
And I would just put on that seesaw as a balance, my friend, because you're right. There are women who regret having had their abortions.
Right.
And they grieve and they count the birthdays of the child that would have been.
Right.
But on the flip side, and this is a taboo point, but it doesn't make it any less true, I'm afraid. You Google this, and I've done this. I've done my homework. There are many parents who regret having had their children. They despise their children. They hate them. they believe it to be the worst decision that they ever made. These parents and their comments can be seen in message boards online. If you Google it, Google the words "I regret having my children," and you will be met with thousands of websites where parents who post anonymously, I might add, because it is such a taboo to say what they're saying, but they will tell you that they deeply regret having had children and that they, if they had their time back, would have had an abortion. So on that scales of there are people who regret having abortions, there are also people who regret not having had abortions. And so all I would say is that I don't think that this particular part of the conversation serves as a point in favor of either the pro-life or pro-choice side. It just comes down to the responsibility of the woman, who has to think very, very carefully about what she's going to do and what decision she's going to make, because all decisions and all rights and freedoms come with responsibilities and potential positives and negatives as side effects. And so I just wanted to make that point, that the whole regret talking point that the pro-lifers like to use doesn't just automatically skew in the direction of a pro-life stance. It can equally skew in the direction of a pro-choice stance. And so nobody has a crystal ball and can't see into the future. It seems to me, given that fact, it's still transparently obvious that it should come down to a woman's right to choose.
And I mean, on that point, I could care less what third parties say about the regret element. The person who has to live with the decision is the expectant mother.
Yes.
And you have to respect her choice one way or the other, recognizing that she knows that she's going to, it's a life-changing moment no matter how you cut it. And far be it from me as a guy to tell her what to do. That's just crazy. I'm not going to do it. And
sure.
I've been in a situation where, I was asked for my input, and I basically said, it's not my decision. I cannot make that decision for you, and I won't, because, it's your decision to make.
Sure. I do think, with the greatest respect, though, I think you're maybe playing with words ever so slightly, perhaps not intentionally. In fact, I would imagine not intentionally. But when you say that it's not your choice to make, you are intentionally or unintentionally advancing a position there, which is that you believe in bodily autonomy. You are saying, so you're not, I just want to make it clear that there's a distinction here between your position and the identity politics pundits who might say a man shouldn't be involved. You're not saying that a man necessarily shouldn't be involved. You're just saying that your view on abortion is that the woman should make up her own mind.
Yeah.
Right? Which is quite distinct from saying that, asserting that men just shouldn't be involved. For example, you wouldn't judge me, Brian, if my fiance got pregnant and I gave her some advice on my feelings on it. You wouldn't say, how dare you, Dara, for getting involved. You would just still say, at the end of the day, so long as my fiance gets to make her own choice, you'd be happy for me to give her advice. It's just not a personal decision you'd make.
That's right. I can't make the decision,
cool.
But it would be bad. It would be almost immoral of me if I was asked to weigh in on it, to deprive her of my thoughts about the matter.
Yes. So in fact, you do actually agree with me then. As a loved one, you would give your 2 cents, but just so long as the final decision is hers. Because I agree with you on that. I mean, how crazy would it be for a woman who wants to have an abortion not get one because her partner forbid it?
Oh, that's crazy.
Or on the contrary, if she didn't want to have an abortion,
that's the whole father's
her partner
rights
compelled
thing.
her. Yeah, the father's rights argument in this is just ludicrous, it seems to me. It's just the father's rights. If you're a father who's with a woman, assuming a heteronormative perspective here, if you're a father who's with a woman who doesn't consider your point of view, that's not a father's right issue. That's a you chose a shitty partner issue. Right? Because my fiance, whatever decision she would make in the end, I know her well enough, and I think I chose a partner well enough to know that she would consider my point of view. At least consider it. She would take it on board and think about it, digest it, and come to a conclusion. Now, if she disagrees with me at the end, I agree with you, my friend. It's her body, it's her choice. But, these fathers who get frustrated, I should have a legal right in this matter. How does that even work, legally speaking? So you're at an impasse. she either does or doesn't want to have an abortion, and you're on the opposite end of the spectrum to whatever choice she wants. Are you suggesting that there should be a legal loophole in the law such that your decision on this matter can circumvent her desire here?
That's a veto of her right.
Exactly. You're vetoing her rights. The father's rights argument here is disgusting. I'm fully on board with the idea that fathers' rights are an important issue, and I would argue that there are some real blind spots in the law about what rights fathers have vis-a-vis their children once they're born, and in terms of judges automatically choosing mothers to be the guardian. And I think there's all sorts of problems there, and how mothers have too much power, again, all assuming a heteronormative relationship here. I think I'm totally open to those arguments, but that father's rights discussion does not enter the abortion argument at all, in my view. If you've chosen a partner that doesn't at all consider your point of view, you've just chosen a shitty partner, I'm afraid. But there should be no legal loophole for you to circumvent her will in this conversation. That would just be a pro-life law on the books. Right. I mean, that would be insane, in my view, at least. But Brian, moving towards, because we're coming towards the end of this conversation, I think it's important that we get to the crescendo here, which is, I've written down a couple of questions, and I've spoken to you about these in advance, but let me just reiterate here. Can we expect other states to follow suit if this statute, this substantive decision stands? Can we, or this like civil like workaround, if you will, stands? Can we expect other states to follow suit in this, the so-called red states? And let's assume that is the case. Should we be worried about the Republican-stacked Supreme Court when these decisions inevitably get passed upwards for them to rule upon? What is the landscape in your mind, and should we be worried about the future here? So just in order, just to recapitulate, do you think other states are going to follow suit here? Are abortion rights in the United States under threat more broadly? And how does the Supreme Court feature in this, my friend?
They are, absolutely. I mean, there are other, I think, there's legislation pending in Florida and in a variety of others, and in a number of other states to mirror or even exceed what the Texas statute says. It's kind of like they're trying to outdo one another in terms of their fundamentalist approach to this.
Christ.
No, there is. They're just and some politicians are bragging about how they're trying to make their state's law stricter than the one in Texas. So it's we're going to see Texas isn't alone in what they're doing. So it's a risk that's going to that's not just limited to that one state, no question about it.
And with the Supreme Court now having 6 Republican justices and only 3 Democratic justices, I can only assume you'll agree with me when I say that we should be gravely concerned about the rulings that are going to be handed down by this current Supreme Court.
I consider this maybe the most radical Supreme Court in American history, to tell you the truth.
Thanks to Trump.
That I can't state it any other way, which is all the more outrageous when you consider the highly problematic way in which these guys got on the court, guys and girls. I mean, Mitch McConnell has done incalculable damage to our governmental institutions by ramming these things through, by changing the rules as to when they're going to be considered, by absolutely frustrating in a way that I think was unconscionable as well as illegal. A president's ability to choose his own nominee. I mean, Mitch McConnell, who was the Senate Majority Leader at the time, prevented a vacancy on the Supreme Court from being filled by President Obama. One of the thoughts I had about that at the time, or that I adopted when I heard it, was, the Senate has the ability to advise and consent, but they can waive that. And if they make a conscious decision that they're not going to review what the president's choice is, to hell with them. Just let the president put them on the court. You should not be allowed to do this in a way that fundamentally frustrates a primary presidential duty, which is to fill vacancies on the court. So, I mean, the last 3 have been, when you consider the monster that nominated them and the whole way that this is played out, it's going to be highly problematic, and it's going to further polarize our society. All the polls show that a substantial majority of the American population opposes reversing Roe v. Wade. So we're going to have nothing but further societal and legal chaos in this country if they go ahead and do this. And again, as I alluded to earlier, I'm worried about their radical approach to other fundamental rights that we currently have. So,
yes.
Yeah, as I was saying to you earlier, be afraid, be very afraid. It's not a good time to be a U.S. citizen. We're seeing way too many things that it's the most disturbing time that I've ever experienced as a U.S. citizen, watching what's happening to the country now.
And what state are you located in again?
I'm in New Jersey.
New Jersey. Do you think there's any chance that in your state that the abortion laws will be given recent developments?
I don't think there's any chance in the world that. Well, I won't say any chance in the world, but this is it's a pretty blue state for the most part.
Sure.
I don't think that even if we have a Republican governor, I don't think there's anybody that's going to be crazy enough in the governor's role here to try to pass legislation like we see in Texas.
Well, I hope you're right, my friend, because I coming to a close here, all I can say, and I mean this genuinely, and I hope nobody would interpret this as a kind of a platitudinous comment, but my heart absolutely breaks for the people of Texas right now.
Oh,
it just, I think of all those people who are going to wake up tomorrow and realize, oh shit, I'm pregnant, but I'm in the 7th week and I can't even leave the state and have an abortion and come back because I'll be criminalized anyway, or those who help me will be criminalized on my behalf. It's just brutal. And it really sickens me as well. This idea, people say this, and it's just so callous. They say, oh, but just move to another state then, move permanently, they mean. Well, just move to another state where abortion is illegal, as though uprooting your entire life and moving to another state were a triviality. Yeah. I moved only a very small distance from my home country. I moved from Ireland to England. The Irish Sea that separates the two, again, geographical knowledge here now is quite slim, but it must only be about 12 miles across, right? Mm-hmm. It still means that I'm a world apart in some sense from my family, because I still have to go to the airport, still have to wait for hours to get in a plane, get the hour of flight, and then an hour driving the other side. So by the time it's all said and done, I've been traveling for 5 to 6 hours if I want to go home. And so it's not practical. But I know what it's like. I know the trauma and the emotion that's involved, and any of the listeners who have been involved in a similar move will know exactly what I'm talking about. You know it, my friend, because you're well-traveled. You lived in Ireland for a time, if I recall correctly. So
lived in Europe,
it's incredibly heartbreaking to leave one's home. Just picture this. Let's just go for a hypothetical here, which is no doubt accurately applied to some life somewhere in Texas. Imagine the girl who is now 18 or 19 years of age, who has just discovered that she's pregnant in her 7th week. She now can't ask her parents to help her have an abortion because she knows that they'll be criminalized. She can't ask any friend to drive her to the airport to go and get an abortion elsewhere in another state, because even if she does that and gets away with it and comes back, if it's discovered at a later point, she'll be criminalized, or those who helped her will be criminalized. And so she really has no choice. How does this 18 or 19-year-old just leave the state and live permanently elsewhere? Please sketch out for me how that's a possibility. This is an obscene statement. It's an obscene argument. I had this person describe it in the most, poetic, romantic terms, and it just really made me violently ill. They were saying, oh, that's what's beautiful about the United States. It's a melting pot of ideas, and if you don't agree with abortion, you can leave Texas. If you don't agree with their abortion rules, you can leave Texas and you can go live in California, or go live in New York, or go live in New Jersey. And so it's just beautiful. It's wonderful. It's a United States where you can go and live under the rules that you deem moral for yourself, as though everybody just had the disposable income and ability to just uproot their lives and go wherever they want in this utopia that they're describing. I just think it's a ridiculous point. And on that note, how the hell is it a United States if there's such division? If in one state there's a death penalty and in another state there isn't. If in one state you can have an abortion and in another state you can't. If in one state you can smoke weed and in another state with the 3-strike rule you can go to prison forever. Am I missing something here, or do I just sound like a European Dauphin who doesn't get the project that is the United States? Could you, just in closing, my friend, offer some thoughts on that? Have I missed the point somewhere?
I don't think you have. The way I would say this is that the dramatic divisions in our society now make the choice of what state you live in increasingly significant.
Assuming you have a choice, because most people don't. There's a lot of poor people in your country. The disparity gap is significant.
You're absolutely right. And one of the arguments in favor of abortion rights is that you're really denying people of less economic means the ability to.
You're just hurting the poor.
Have a procedure. Yeah.
As if they didn't have a fucking enough to deal with. As if they didn't have enough on their plate. You now have to shackle poor women to their wombs and turn them into living, walking incubators. Yeah. I'm sorry, Brian, but I've tried to keep my cool for the entirety of this conversation, but I have to say the whole thing makes me fucking sick. It makes me sick.
As I've indicated to you in other settings, I've never been more unhappy being an American citizen than I am now, because I just see our entire system of laws under major assault in a very, very destructive way.
But Brian, just move. Why don't you just go and live in another country? If you don't like the United States, why are you such a hater? Be a patriot. Stop stamping all over the flag. Go live in Europe. Go live in Europe, you snowflake lefty. What a f***ing crock of shit.
Uproot yourself.
This video just got demonetized. But I don't give a shit. F*** money. What a crock of shit. What a fucking load of bullshit. I mean, Christ above.
It's the eternal problem of exile and immigration. Really.
So rather than address the morality, these people's knee-jerk reaction to any criticism is, leave then.
Well, you may remember. Well, this is funny. I was going to say you may remember during the '60s that I'm talking about long before you were born. But during the height of the Vietnam War, there was this America, love it or leave it. So that's always been sort of kind of an extremist strain in our country. You just have to accept it the way it is, whether you like it or not, or leave.
And if we followed that, the transatlantic slave trade would be alive and well.
Yeah, something like that. I would agree.
Yeah. How sick. But look, I don't want to finish on a negative note. I think there's a lot of beauty to your nation. I fully agree with your nation's stance on free speech. I am rather envious of how it works over there. I've made videos of late, as I'm sure you've seen, detailing how certain swear words are illegal in the UK and how one can be arrested and criminalized. So I don't want to be seen as an American hater. There's a lot I admire about America. And there's a lot that I think it gets right constitutionally and legally. But on this particular issue, I have to say that I think your country is going down a very bad road indeed. And it sounds like you agree, my friend.
Well, yes. I mean, I have that issue to deal with in my own life. How could I uproot myself and move to Ireland, for example? You know what I'm saying? I have to wait and see. And part of me, despite my antiquity, is, you need to stay here and fight through this and to, lend your voice as a citizen to the way you think the country should go.
Well, at risk of sounding perhaps a bit revolutionary here, if there's anything I can ever do to help in that fight, my friend, please let me know. I know my channel is still quite small, but when we spoke beforehand, you said you've noticed my channel is growing, and you're absolutely spot on. Hopefully one day this channel will have grown into a platform that may in fact have some influence. And, if there's anything I can do to help in that fight, or if there's anything I can do at all, even just moral support, I'm here because I fully agree with you on this issue. And more to the point, Brian, thank you very much for joining me here today, because this conversation was very informative for me. It was wonderful to have a legal expert such as yourself to bounce these ideas off. I was going to make a podcast episode on my own about abortion, but I felt it just wouldn't have had the gravitas that this conversation, I think, has had with your involvement in it. And so just, as per usual, it's been a long time since we had a conversation. I'm just really great. It's really great to see you again. And,
Same here.
It's been a wonderful conversation. So thank you very much for joining me here today, my friend.
It's always a pleasure, Dara, and I look forward to future discussions.
I can't wait. And guys, if you are interested in hearing more from Brian, I will include a link to his awesome book in the description below. He wrote an amazing book about the fighter pilots and so on of the Second World War, Brian.
Yes,
right.
That's right.
And you would be enthralled by it. It's amazing. And sorry, go for it.
Yeah, the other thing I'm doing is, we got
the
together
blog.
The blog. And I've actually
the blog. Yes.
Yes, I've actually started to post there again. I just did one a few days ago, and I've kind of promised myself that I'm going to be more active in doing that. So I will.
Fantastic.
I'll give you a link to the rectification of names, which is I think my favorite blog. It's run by a New York Jewish guy who is liberal and very, very one of the smartest people I've run into. Very, very great guy.
Other than myself, of course.
Yes.
Sorry, low-hanging fruit, my friend.
I'll simply say that some of the conversations, it's almost like a salon during the French classic period with the French kings. There's many people there are just extremely bright and
awesome.
Good conversations, good dialogues. They're not hard to find there. I'll put it that way.
Yes, I'll include all those links in the description below, my friend. The only other thing I wanted to make the audience aware of is that if you have enjoyed this conversation between Brian and I, there are several other conversations on the channel here, podcasts that Brian and I have shared the stage on, which you may find interesting, discussing religion, its utility, the existence of God, and all that stuff. And so, yeah, there's a lot to sink your teeth into, dear listener, if you're interested. But other than that, thank you very much. If you got this far in the conversation, I do like to extend a personal thank you to anybody who got to the end. And I usually give a code word to those who got this far so that they can type it in the comments below and indicate that they got this far in the conversation. So for now, what code word shall we go with, Brian? What code word shall we give our audience so that when they type it in the comments below, it'll be clear to us that they got this far in the conversation? Anything come to mind?
Let's use my tag. Let's use my self-identifier, Red Hand.
Red Hand?
Yeah.
REDHAND.
That's it.
Red Hand. Awesome. So, guys, if you want to indicate that you got this far in the conversation, you may write Red Hand in the comments below. If I see Red Hand, I'll give you a special little heart and I'll give you a response there in the comments, and I'd love to hear from you. Other than that, guys, if you did enjoy the video, make sure and pop a like on it. That helps out the channel enormously. And if it is your first time visiting the channel, do make sure you hit the subscribe button for more awesome content like this. And while you're at it, check the bell notification icon. That way you'll be able to stay up to date with all things on the channel, and you'll even be notified as and when my latest videos go live. So thank you very much for joining me here today, and thank you again to you, Brian. I'll see you in the future. I'm sure we'll have many more conversations like this. And to everybody else, all the best. Bye-bye.
Always a pleasure, Dara. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.